This question is going to be for both of you, but I'm going to phrase it a little differently for each one. Mr. Barker, as a former preacher with great familiarity with Christianity, what do you think that atheists can learn from Christians that they might not otherwise be exposed to? And Mr. D'Souza, what do you think Christians can learn from atheists in our society? Mr. Barker, could you go first?
Well, we can learn a lot from modern Christians. There are many modern Christians who are wonderful people. In fact, I will march shoulder to shoulder with some of them. One of my friends, Tom Malone in Atlanta, is an outspoken atheist, but he marched shoulder to shoulder with the Baptists in the civil rights movement. Many atheists and agnostics and secular people were involved in civil rights and in the abolition of slavery and all of that. It's just that we didn't wear it on, like, you know, we're showing that we are atheists and that's why we're doing it. And when you think about it, when an atheist does a good deed without any prospect of a future reward or avoiding punishment, isn't it more moral than a believer? I think we can learn a lot from Christians who have a sense of community. They have a sense of togetherness and community. For a lot of atheists, that's difficult to find. Many of them join the Unitarian Church, which is a great place for that. And by the way, Unitarianism is a great cover if you're running for public office. Others of us don't feel that need for community, but if you do, we can see that model. In fact, it was the churches that became rallying points for Martin Luther King Jr. in the civil rights movement because it was a good place for community to come together. So I also think we can maybe learn and appreciate some of the music that's in. You know, I'm a musician and I played Christian music. I don't miss the Christian lyrics, but some of that music, Ave Maria by Schubert, I think is gorgeous, although I don't believe in the Virgin Mary. I learned from his feeling of evocation, of adoration for someone that he loves, that I don't. I can still get into that spirit and feel this very human expression. So I think we can learn a lot from modern Christians. I don't think there's much to learn from the document upon which Christianity is based. That Bible, which, by the way, I am interpreting in context and know it at least as well as you do. If you can figuratively dismiss a lot of the things, then why not dismiss God as one huge figure of speech as well?
Thank you, Mr. Barker.
I appreciate your comments. I take them as, in a certain way, a refutation of a theme in Christopher Hitchens when he says how religion poisons everything. One of the things that's, I think, very exasperating about this new atheism is its uncritical nature. I mean, religion hasn't poisoned Bach or Dante or Milton or a great part of our sacred music, our literature, our culture, the Gothic cathedrals, this building, are the product, if you will, of religious inspiration. It's formed our civilization. Even the atheist should have the dignity to admit that, and I'm glad you have. For my part, I actually value very much the atheist critique. Now, I value it, if you will, at its best. In some senses, you know, when a Richard Dawkins, who's really a biologist, wanders into medieval theology and in one paragraph essentially goes, "Take that, Aquinas," I have to chuckle because this is ultimately what happens when a biologist is allowed to leave the lab. You get something rather embarrassing. However, the great atheists I mentioned earlier, I think have given us a very profound way to think about how do we know what we know. By the way, this started in the Enlightenment. There wasn't that much atheism in the Enlightenment. There were a couple of the French philosophers were atheists. But mostly the Enlightenment was an objection, not to Christianity, but an unholy alliance, you may say, between throne and altar. And that's what pushed a lot of people toward deism. But we've seen great atheists in the last 100 years. By the way, I probably spend more time reading them than I do Christian apologetics. If you read my book, What's So Great About Christianity, the people most frequently cited are people like Nietzsche. Nietzsche was in some ways very deep, very prophetic. Essentially, he argued in a nutshell that if you remove God, if you kill God, he says, don't be shallow enough to think that you can preserve Christian morality. Be nice to people, believe in equality, believe in human dignity. He goes, Christianity brought those values into the world. When you kill God, those values begin to erode. In a sense, what he was doing is saying that you can't have it all. A lot of the new atheists today are in some shallow sense saying, we don't want God, but we'll keep all the other principles. For example, the idea of do no harm presumes the equal dignity of the other man's life. But that's a Christian invention. Go back to ancient Greece and Rome, you won't find it. The Spartans, when they found the sick child, they didn't want it. Leave it on the hillside in the winter, find it dead in the morning. That's not the shocking thing. The great thinkers of ancient Greece, Plato, Aristotle, they knew about this. They didn't care. They viewed it with equanimity. And why? Because the preciousness of human life was simply not an important value in ancient Greece and Rome.
Thank you,
And
Mr.
I'm sure
D'Souza.
Dan Barker will find
I'm sorry, I
that.
have to cut you off here.
Of course.
Andrew, do you have another question?
All right. We in the Harvard Secular Society wanted to host this debate in order to provide a productive discourse between two sides that are often seen as opposing forces. Mr. D'Souza, do you personally believe that these type of debates, or how do you believe that these type of debates benefit the society? And the same question will go to Mr. Barker afterwards.
We might finally find a point of agreement. And this would be very good. Look, 100 years ago, you could go to Columbia, you could listen to a debate on, is God dead? It would be a public debate in a public forum. Somehow theological debates about these, you may call them big questions, have vanished from American public life. In a certain sense, to complete my answer to the last question, I'm grateful to the new atheists. They have put the issue front and center on the table. Great. It's actually very good for Christians, by the way. Why? Because a lot of Christians have forgotten that they have one foot in secular society. If you ask them, why do you think this or why do you think that, they'll reply, because the Bible says this, the book of Leviticus says that, the Gospel of Luke says this, and of course, if you're Dan Barker, you're going to say, who cares what the Bible says? Or, to put it differently, who cares anymore what the Bible says, since he used to care. But who cares anymore what the Bible says? So there is a rejection of the shared Christian assumptions that once shaped our society. This is a fact of our time. The reason I think these kinds of debates are very useful is that they force both sides not only to engage, that's healthy in itself, to debate the fairness of the public square. I don't want to leave it all to himself. I would like to see a rule of fairness allowing believers and non-believers equal access to the public square. Not this absolute separation, which is essentially a strategy to drive the Christians out and keep the public square safe for atheism. Finally, I think that it's also useful because it forces atheists to confront their hidden metaphysical assumptions. Very often in the academy, atheism is presented as synonymous with sophistication. This is a bogus intellectual move that leads young people to think, I think wrongly, that as you become educated, you should slough off your beliefs in God because they are somehow unreasonable or irrational. This is the prejudice of our time. This is the reigning prejudice at Harvard. So the reason I'm here is to speak not only to Christians, but also to non-believers and say, hey, let's apply the critical lens even-handedly. Let's recognize the faith-based assumptions in our beliefs, even in modern science.
Thank you, Mr.
Overall,
D'Souza.
it's a healthy debate.
Thank you.